And now it's time for the Mastering Profitability Financial Management for Two-Wheeler Dealers. And for that, we already have here with us Mr. Hemal and Thakkar, Senior Practice Leader and Director, CRISIL Limited. Please put your hands together and let's welcome him as he's already here on stage.
So good evening everyone, and thank you FADA for this opportunity. I have structured the presentation in a way where I am going to talk about, pan-India comparison and comparing the eastern part of the country with pan-India. Then, I have a few slides on dealer financial health and, what is it that people should be doing or dealers should be doing to ensure that they are able to maintain or manage their profitability. So if you actually look at the picture here, you will see that on a pan-India level, motorcycles contribute to somewhere about 60 to 63%, while scooters have gone up to about 37.2%. This is scooters and mopeds put together. And if we compare East India, we are still largely dominated by motorcycles. Of course, scooters have increased their share here also, but it's largely a motorcycle-driven economy. More to do with the fact that the northeastern part of the country is still, where there is a terrain kind of infrastructure, where you will need more motorcycles as compared to scooters. If you look at the powertrain mix, at a pan-India level, we are at about 5.5% electrification level. But again, in the eastern part of the country, we are at about 3%. One reason is also because the level of scooterization is lower as compared to what you have across the country. And in terms of electrification, the drive is largely, with respect to scooters and not motorcycles. Also, if you look at the overall segment split, what is very interesting to see is that, the taste and preferences of the customers are changing. You earlier had, up to 110cc or the commuter segment, which used to command almost like 57% of the total sales, which has come down to 47%. 125cc has increased from 21% to 30%, and premium has remained in the range of about 23 to 24%. Also, what is very important is if you actually look at the shares of various regions, East has remained where it was, in the range of about 19.5%. If you look at South region, it has significantly increased its share from 25.5% to 28.2%. On the other hand, West has lost share and North has been able to maintain. Now, we've done some comparison, across various regions along with East India, because this is very specific to the eastern part of the country. And this is with respect to two-wheeler dealerships. If you actually see, the return on capital employed is the best in eastern part of the country with respect to two-wheeler dealers as compared to any other part of the country. The ROC is about 17.9% in comparison to 10.9%, which is the lowest for North India, and 16.8%, which is relatively higher than the pan-India average. Again, when we look at parameters like operating income to gross block, East continues to lead with about 55.4, and in terms of interest coverage ratio or operating margins to interest or finance charges, East is at 3.6, where South is far more disciplined at about 5.9%. But if you look at in the subsequent slides, you'll also see that the debt equity ratio of East is the lowest, which also means that generally dealers in East, especially with respect to two-wheelers, are leveraging themselves lower in comparison to the other parts of the country. And if you look at something like South or North, it is to the extent of 3.6 and 3.2 times. When you look at debt to income, again, East is quite reasonable at about 4.2. South is the best. And then you have North at about 6.1. When we look at profit margins, and this is based on, a set of dealers across India in various geographies, only for the two-wheeler segment, you will actually see that the operating margins of two-wheeler dealers is about 3%. This is as per reported financials. And the net margins is at about 1.8%. But if you look at other zones like North, it's about 2% and 0.5%. And if you look at South and West, they are relatively very similar at about 3.1% operating margins and 1.6% of net margin. Also, what is very important is when we look at the eastern part of the country, if you look at outside liabilities to net worth, which means, to the extent to which they are taking leverage or to the extent to which, they are able to leverage their dealerships, it is quite commendable. They are at about 2.9 times. But if you look at North, they are highly leveraged at about 7.5 times the net worth. Now, this is a very crowded slide, but I'll try to give you a sense of the message that I'm trying to get out of it. If you actually see, the pan-India average for debtor days is 19, which in case of East India is 17. If you look at the inventory days, it's at about 52.4, but for East it is 52.6. Now, if you actually look at all these zones, you will see that South is the best zone with respect to a better cash conversion cycle, lower, kind of debtor days and better inventory management as compared to the other regions. East is relatively better in comparison to West and North. However, it is still relatively behind when it comes to comparison to South. Again, when we look at current ratio, I think East is possibly the best and by far way ahead as compared to the other zones that we have. And when we look at gross current asset days, again, kind of East is somewhere in between. I think, maybe someone like South and West are relatively better off in a way. Now, this is where I'll get into, the crux of today's discussion. How to improve your profitability and achieving efficiencies. As Pradeep ji mentioned initially, we will be having a detailed, kind of workshop on this in the last week of March. I'll just give you a glimpse of, the overall things that we plan to cover and also what is it that we've covered today from a very high level perspective. So the first part is sales and marketing efficiency. The second part is service efficiency. And the third part is operating efficiency. Now, all this has to be, backed by data and analytics. Now, what do you mean by sales and marketing efficiency? Which means improving your sales funnel and get more inquiries. Now, how do you do so? If you actually see, this is something, which is a very basic framework which all of the OEMs try to drill down into the heads of the dealerships. ETBR is something, which is tracked on an ongoing basis. But what is very important is the way in which you track this. You need to understand what is the source of inquiry that is, coming in or the lead from where it is getting generated. Is it a walk-in? Is it through the website? Is it through a telephonic inquiry? Is it something, which is event-based? Is it through some different social media platform? And what is very important to understand is you need to understand the conversion of each of these different sources separately. You can't generalize all the leads into one bucket and look at ETBR in total. You will have to look at it source wise. So out of the number of walk-ins, how many did test drive? How many of that test drive got converted to booking? How much of that booking went into a retail inquiry? And then finally, the booking to retail conversion has happened. So that is something that, you will have to keep a note of, because you will then come to know whether you are converting most of your customers after giving test drives. If yes, it's good. If not, why are you not converting? So that why is something, which will get answered if you are able to manage this entire thing very seamlessly. Also, what is very important is today when you look at, the sales people which are there at various dealerships, it is very important to understand that they are the face to the customer, for the dealership. So it is important to understand what is the efficiency of that salesperson, and that needs to be, kind of monitored very, very closely. You need to see, the number of test drives that a particular salesman has given, the kind of follow-ups that he does. Does he even go to the extent to understand that if he has lost some sales, what is the reason for that loss? That is also something, which is very, very important. And many a times we've seen that In the CRM systems, sorry to say, most of the executives will not be bothered and they will just put junk. Now, because of this, you will not be in a position to analyze or assess the real reasons and the real problems. And there is where, you will not be in a position to assess the entire situation better. Now, if you do this, you will see that by doing this, you will achieve better, kind of conversion. And this is very, very critical. Now, how do you look at marketing efficiency, after looking at sales efficiency? Now, dealerships across the country take a lot of steps to improve their visibility, attract customers to them. Now, what do? They do a lot of BTL activities. What is very important in these BTL activities is if it is happening at the right time, at the right place, and right kind of display of that activity is happening. Also, what is very, very critical is most of the dealerships unfortunately end up looking at these leads as a normal lead, which they get in day-to-day activities. But this is not tracked separately, and hence the focus on this is lost as soon as the BTL activity is done. Now, there is where the problem is, and hence, you don't see, kind of conversions here. You need to treat it like any other inquiry. You need to have that kind of follow-ups on a regular basis. But unfortunately, say for example, if we say that there is some kind of BTL activity which is done during Durga Puja, so only for those 9 or 10 days, there is that kind of activity happening, and after that, then there is no follow-up. But in case of your general leads that you generate, there is a consistent follow-up that happens. So that is something, which is very, very critical. Again, many dealers which we have seen, especially on the two-wheeler side, where, you leverage on your secondary or tertiary network. So out of the total sales that are being done, around 45% of the sales come from the main dealer, at an approximate level in Pan India. And 55% of the sales come from secondary and tertiary network, especially in case of two-wheelers. Now, what happens there is, most of the times the dealerships do not have a database of any kind of leads that were generated through the secondary and tertiary network. And then there is no follow-up. There is no reaching out to the customer on a proactive basis. So we should have an active, collated list of customers. And this could be old inquiries, wherein you can keep in touch with the customers on an ongoing basis because there is an intent that the customer has shown to purchase the vehicle. Similarly, there are various inquiries that get generated through third party and, through various leads. Now, third party could be certain agents, brokers, or, word of mouth from your other customers. Now, there also only one rule applies, like in case of BTL. Follow up on time and share information, which in most of the cases gets lost because this is not treated as a normal, kind of lead generation activity. So that is also very, very critical. What is very important to understand is when you do all this, you will only then come to know what is the kind of return you are making basis the spends that you are doing in terms of marketing. Is it really giving you that kind of return? Or, it is giving you suboptimal returns. So that is something, which you will come to know when you do these kind of assessments on a regular basis. What is also very important is, service efficiency. Now, when we look at service efficiency, what is very important is you need to improve your service retention. First time the customer walks into your showroom is during the sales. Then he comes to you for after sales. What kind of experience do you give to the customer during after sales is very, very important. Do you help him resolve most of the issues? Is his experience really smooth? Do you call him back, take feedback? What went right? What went wrong? How frequently does it happen? Do you monitor your own NPS or net promoter score at a dealership or at a branch level on an ongoing basis? If no, this is something, which is very, very critical to kind of do, and this is something, which will enhance your customer experience. Also, what is important is today, thanks to Vahan, you at least have RTO-wise data for various RTOs that are there in the, kind of city in which you are operating. Today, a dealer from a service perspective is not limited, to the geography in which he is operating. we have seen that because of better customer experience, we've seen people from different RTO codes come back to some other dealer because they have had a very good experience of, kind of engaging with the dealer. The customer experience has been good. And service is something, which adds significantly to the margins. So from that perspective, it is very, very important to focus on this particular space. Also, if you ask me, there are various things, which may be very, very specific to certain locations. Of course, there are things like accessories, AMC, merchandise, which will definitely add on to your, bottom line or even top line for that matter. So that is something that you should focus on. But just to give you an example, I am from Mumbai. Every time just before the rainy season, if you send your car or two-wheeler for servicing anytime from say April to June or from March to May, they will tell you the climate is quite humid, it rains heavily in Bombay, please get an antitrust treatment done. Now that adds on to revenue for the dealership at the end of the day, and that adds on to margins. So certain such initiatives which will help you garner more revenue share, at the same time help you build margins, is something that you need to kind of capture. Also, there have to be certain systemic triggers that will help you proactively order, parts for replacement, especially, the parts which are fast moving. I'm sure, many of them, have it. And also, you need to see that what is the turnaround times of various service related initiatives that you have taken. How many vehicles are you able to service in a day? What is the turnaround time per vehicle depending on the job to be done? And that is something, which will help you improve your profitability. If we look at expense optimization, I will again just give a recap. You will have to look at marketing spends. You will have to train your employees. Now, this is something, where we have seen very, very less enthusiasm from the dealerships. If you ask me, this is a very, very important area. And one of the major areas that will also help you control your attrition. Today, if you look at two-wheeler dealerships, the attrition is to the extent of about 30 to 35%, which is significantly higher than the average of about 15 to 70%, which will be across FADA members. Now, because of which, what is important is people who understand your customer or who are the face of your customer are churning or are switching jobs. You need to retain them. How will you retain them? I think training is a very good mechanism to, kind of retain them in one way. Other thing is go digital. There are still many dealerships who still work on a paper and pen approach apart from CRM systems, which are actually mandated by, the OEM. So if you do not go digital, the world is moving really fast and you will not be in a position to, kind of reach the kind of objective that you have in mind. What is very important is even basic things like form filling for inquiry or content sharing for, the customers or internal documentation. All these records need to be digitized. Again, selling expenses. This is divided into two parts. One is, of course, the kind of discounting and offers that the dealer provides. And the other is also how are you incentivizing your own salesman to kind of ensure that he pushes and is able to convert better. Another very important part, is working capital management. Now, if you look at working capital management, two things need to be kept in mind. One is keep a very close tab on the limits that you have availed for inventory funding. What is the timeline in which you are actually repaying it? Are you on overdue? Are you keeping a tab on it? Second, reduce debtor days by ensuring that collection happens on time and then there is timely receipt of payment. What is also very important is manpower optimization. In many dealerships across the country now, what we are seeing is there are manpower, which are not on roll but off roll. There may be certain people who will do your RTO work and they will take a lump sum amount basis the number of cases that they execute. But there are still many dealers in the country who have staff working for RTO related stuff. So if you are generating N number of inquiries or X number of inquiries, wherein you are in a position to reduce the fixed cost by bringing this offline or on off roll as compared to having that same person on roll, then that is something that you guys need to do. Because typically what it is seen that if the salary of the person is 100 rupees, the cost that gets debited to the dealership will be somewhere about 300, because 200 rupees will be the overheads that will be incurred on that particular employee. Now, if this is something which can be looked at from an off-roll perspective, you will end up saying that additional 200, which you spent on having that employee on roll. A few other things, which we kind of tried to look at specifically for this event was that, as I was saying, if you look at the primary network across India, the split is 35% is primary and 65% is secondary. So what I mean by secondary is not main dealers, but secondary and tertiary dealers. So there are many companies which call it as ASCs, or there are many companies which call it as secondary or tertiary dealers in a way. So not the main dealer, but the not the AMD, but the other partners which help you sell. Now, if you see in case of West, 40% is main dealers and 60% is kind of sub dealers. In case of East, we have leveraged ourselves too high. And if you see the tertiary network and the secondary network dependence is very high. Is this good? Is this bad? Now, what is very important is the high share of third parties in network also imposes a risk on credit cycles and customer experience, because they will not treat the customer in the same manner in which a main dealer is treating. And all SOPs will possibly not be followed by them. So that is something, which is very, very critical. Also, strengthening primary network ensures consistent branding, service quality, and ensures a consistent customer experience in comparison to what you have through tertiary network. I'll conclude by, kind of putting out a few best practices, of high performing two-wheeler dealerships. First, customer management. When you are doing community events and rides, you do targeted customer marketing, referral programs, telecalling for proactive outreach. Second is digitizing the entire process from optimization perspective. So, digital upskilling of employees, that is very, very important. Leverage OEM's digital initiatives. Many of them have launched many digital initiatives. Ensure that you have everything online and you try to create a near paperless environment, because that is something which is going to eventually happen going forward. Sales and inventory management. Prioritize your own branches over secondary network. Target selling inventory within 45 days. Maintain zero dues with OEMs to strengthen credibility. Track market share and sales trends in micro markets. Now, this is another thing, which we are seeing is missing amongst dealerships. Most of you will have access to Vahan control, you will know Vahan portal, and you will know how sales are happening at micro market level. But many of you actually do not keep a tab of it on an ongoing basis. We have seen OEMs do that on an ongoing basis now, and then they are deciding targets or they are giving inputs to dealers. I think rather than that, if it works bottom up, it's going to be a win-win situation for both of you guys. Employee performance. Incentivize best performing staff and upskill employees in selling techniques by funding workshops and certifications. This is another thing, which needs to be done very, very aggressively. And last but not the least, OEM relationship. It's very important to understand what the OEM has in terms of expectations from the dealer. Track and meet key performance criteria that the OEM would want the dealer to meet. And also learn and implement best practices from other regions. That is also very, very important. I saw that in the earlier presentation, that Pradeep ji was making. He mentioned that, you need to benchmark yourselves with other regions. Now that is something, which is very, very critical, I think, and very, very important to know as to where do you stand in comparison to others and how, do you progress from there on. Thank you. That's it from my side. Thank you very much for this opportunity. Thank you.
Mr. Thakkar, thank you so very much. I will request you to kindly please join us here on stage. And on that note, I will request Mr. Akhil Agarwal to kindly please join us here on stage to felicitate Mr. Thakkar. Thank you so very much, ladies and gentlemen.